welcome Omar once again. Uh, if I may just kick off, Omar, the district development councils have been held, and we have also been seeing a lot of movement of, say, some of the people who are representing these territorial constituencies from their parties, or independents moving to say the Apni party, or you know uh, kind of tilting the balance in some of the closely contested DDCs. So can you kind of tell us how does the People's Alliance look now post the polls?
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for having me for this idea exchange. It's been a while since I last did one, and I certainly haven't done one from the comfort of my own home. I've either come to Bahadur Shah Zafar Marg, when that's where you operated out of, or then I think the last one I did was when I came to Noida. So
That's
this
right.
for me is a very different experience, but it's nice to be here amongst all of you. You've kickstarted with perhaps the current topic of the day, particularly in the Valley, and that is the DDC elections and the post-election scenario that is unfolding. First and foremost, your question was, how does the People's Alliance look? Well, the People's Alliance looks no different now than it did pre-DDC polls, except that we now know that there is a popular mass of support behind what the People's Alliance stands for, particularly in Kashmir. But it would be wrong to deny that we've even opened our sort of banks of support in Jammu as well. Going simply by the numbers, without any horse trading, without any interference, we are actually in a position to establish chairman or chairpersons of the People's Alliance in about 12 or 13 of the districts out of 20 in Jammu and Kashmir. And the reason I said if without horse trading, because we've seen an alarming sort of willingness of the administration to step into the realm of the political sphere. On the one hand, the administrations, both in the center and in the state, or in the Union Territory, have been patting themselves on the back about how they conducted a largely peaceful, free and fair District Development Council election, which was reasonably well attended. I won't go so far as to say it was the best attended election, because we definitely know it wasn't. The 2014 assembly elections were better attended. The 2011 panchayat elections in Jammu and Kashmir were far better, saw far better participation. But be that as it may, I think post 5th August 2019, to have seen this level of participation was in itself surprising. What has come as a surprise to us post this election is the way in which the government and wings and parts of the government machinery are actively playing a part in converting results in favor of the People's Alliance into results in favor of the Apni party, which is a very close associate of the ruling BJP. And a simple example I will give you, which is South Kashmir's Shupanya district, where 3 of my senior colleagues have been picked up on preventive detention charges, 105, 107. We have no idea what it is they're supposed to be, what trouble their detentions are preventing, because there was never any aim to create trouble. In fact, one of these colleagues, who comes from Shupanya town proper, wasn't even detained under 105, 107 post 5th August 2019. So he wasn't considered troublesome then, but suddenly is considered troublesome now. And both of these people, their families, it has been indicated to them by the police that once the DDC chairman's election is over and the People's Alliance is not in a position to establish or form, to occupy the office of chairman of Shupanya District Development Committee, or council, then these people will be released. So this is one aspect of it. The second aspect, which I brought to light in a press conference in Srinagar some weeks ago, was family members of elected DDC members being detained by the police and being told that, look, so long as the elected member votes or goes and joins the Apni party, once that is done, we will release the person who's in detention. So it's an extremely worrying at the moment. The visible signs of it are confined to one district, which is Shupanya, but the undercurrents. Just yesterday, the National Conference President, Dr. Farooq Abdullah, had a meeting with our district presidents from Kashmir province and also some other senior party colleagues. And we heard of similar pressures being brought to bear in North Kashmir from Kupwara district and in Central Kashmir from Ganderbal district as well. So it doesn't make for a very pretty picture. On the one hand, you cite these examples as democracy in action, the rebirth of democracy in Jammu and Kashmir. And on the other hand, you're quite happy to throttle democracy at the hands of the police by using all these underhand tactics.
Yeah. Omar, if I may just take it a little differently, in the sense that, these DDC elections, there have been different views on the DDC elections itself, whether it actually kickstarts, opens up political space, and, whether it kind of is moving towards a more democratic governance in Jammu and Kashmir. But there are doubts about say whether assembly elections would be held, and even as the Supreme Court hears the petitions out on which NC has challenged in the Supreme Court. So what is your impression about, say, DDC elections opening up political space and kind of kickstarting or creating a more democratic environment in J&K?
Well, let's start with has it kickstarted a political process? Well, of course it has. The political process was on forget about being on a back burner. It was in the deep freeze post 5th August 2019. There was no political activity, none in Kashmir, and very little to talk about even in Jammu. So the DDC elections have kickstarted a political process. They have also, to an extent, put to rest these claims that mainstream politics in Jammu and Kashmir is dead, or that there is no place for the traditional political parties of Jammu and Kashmir, and that they will find the going extremely difficult post-August 2019. So I think that theory has pretty much been put to rest as well. If you look at the National Conference in terms of our strike rate and our ability to win seats on both sides of the Pir Panchal, Kashmir province and Jammu province, I think it would be pretty surprising if somebody were to turn around and say, well, this political party is dead or has no standing today. So that aside, does it open up new avenues for democratic representation? Well, first, previous governments have not been undemocratic, but it is true that grassroots democracy is strengthened by having a tier of governance closer to those grassroots. That's always why Panchayati Raj institutions have been favored across the country. It was why I was keen in 2011 to go ahead with Panchayati elections. I was very keen to go ahead with the tier 2 and tier 3 elections. In fact, we'd issued notifications for the tier 2 elections, but I was stopped in my tracks by my allies, the Congress party. The then leader of the Congress in J&K, Saifuddin Sosab, came to me and said that we have to stop this, that we need a little bit more time to put our own house, as in the Congress's house, in order, and that we will go ahead with these tier 2 elections a little later. And unfortunately, we weren't able to go ahead with them. So yes, these DDC polls will create another level of political representation. They will create another generation of young, upcoming, mainstream political participants. And that's across party lines, whether it's in the national conference or other political parties. So it's on the whole, it's good. But I mean, again, I'll make the point that this administration should resist the temptation to assist the BJP and the Apni party. People have spoken, the numbers are in front of them. Let the DDC elections go ahead and let the chairpersons be selected.
Yeah. Looking at, say the PAGD alliance, do you see a permanence to the alliance as such, in the sense that, do you see that PAGD becomes a single kind of unit of comprising different constituents, becoming the political face in the valley and the union territory, vis-a-vis the Congress or the BJP in the coming days?
Well, I don't think you can claim or sort of aspire to permanence for any alliance. You only have to look at the experiences within the NDA. Look at, their oldest allies, the Shiv Sena and the Akali Dal, are today no longer part of the National Democratic Alliance. So I'd be the last person to assume that there is an element of permanence to the People's Alliance. We are clear on what our agenda is, and we are very clear that we will work together towards the fulfillment of that agenda. I think we are stronger having fought these elections together, because a lot of people, a lot of commentators, I think, assumed that this alliance would fall apart at the first sign of any serious test, which is not to say we didn't have difficulties. We did have teething problems with seat sharing. There were constituencies in which the People's Alliance ended up fighting against the People's Alliance. In my own erstwhile assembly constituency, a seat that was allotted to the National Conference was snatched away by the district president of the PDP, who fought as an independent. And I'm sure the PDP will cite similar examples of where somebody from their party lost to a member of the National Conference or to some other constituent of the People's Alliance. So, as with every alliance, it's not 100% smooth sailing, but we survived this major test, and I don't foresee any other major test on the horizon for the time being. So we redouble our efforts towards the aim with which we came together.
Omar, when PAGD was formed, the basic premise was to restore the status of Jammu and Kashmir pre-August 5. And over the last 1 year, there have been many constitutional changes. One of them is also the DDC elections. By contesting the elections, did you not normalize the situation?
Did we not normalize the situation? Well, that was one of the sort of points that was under active consideration when we were debating whether to participate in the elections or not. And the conclusion that we drew was that, look, these elections were going to go ahead with our presence or without it. And at a time when the very sort of the acceptability or the public support for the agenda of the People's Alliance was being called into question. We had, what other way did we have of peaceful, democratic means to prove that we enjoyed popular support than going down this avenue? Because the other avenue was then to have adopted the path that the Hurriyat takes, which is to go down the path of confrontation, to go down the path of engineering protests, strikes, stone pelting, that sort of activity, or then to try and engineer boycotts of elections, which I think would have opened us up to the sort of criticism that would have been very difficult for us to survive. The People's Alliance is made up of mainstream political parties. It is made up of mainstream political parties that have all participated in government formation at various points in their history. And therefore, to have adopted means or methods previously used by the Hurriyat to prove that we enjoyed popular support was not something that any of the constituents of the People's Alliance was willing to consider. And therefore, we thought that this was the best way to prove to the world at large, but particularly to the rest of India, that this bogey that has been fed to them by the people, by the BJP, that the people of Jammu and Kashmir are resoundingly in favor of what happened on 5th August 2019, that even the people of Kashmir are 100% behind the decision of 5th August 2019 was wrong. And I think by participating in this election, we have been able to send that message out. So no, I don't think our participation has in any way legitimized what the BJP has done. In fact, if anything, it calls into question the support and the popularity of what was done on 5th August 2019.
Maybe I'm reading a bit too much into this, but, given your statements since you got out, and reading between the lines and sometimes reading the lines themselves, we sense a very strong sense of despair. In fact, there's a sense that you want to step back, or you don't see much happening. Now, one was, I would like your comment on that. And the second thing was, what do you think are the irreversibles that have happened in the valley now? And what would be a good case and a best case scenario, say, over the next 4 to 5 years? I know it's tough to still gaze in the valley, but
it's not despair. I think it's a lot of anger. It's a lot of disappointment. I'm only human, and when I see the ways in which this government is going out of its way to throttle the mainstream, it's very difficult to understand, to come to terms with, and to rationalize. In their own heads, I'm sure they can rationalize it. But having been an elected chief minister of this state for 6 years, having been a functioning parliamentarian in Jammu and Kashmir from 1998 onwards, I find no rational explanation and no justification for the sort of things that they've done, for picking up and detaining political leaders and national conference leaders in South Kashmir, national conference leaders in North Kashmir, senior PDP leaders, Naeem Akhtar, for example. What exactly are they doing by detaining somebody like Naeem Akhtar under preventive detention laws, under 105, 107? What did Naeem Akhtar Sahab do all these months after coming out of detention? Did he engineer any street protests? Did he go out and throw stones? Did he do dharnas outside the secretariat or outside the lieutenant governor's residence? Nothing, none of these things. And yet he finds himself in preventive arrest. He was one of 2 people detained in the erstwhile MLA hostel, and subsequently has been shifted to hospital on health grounds. Why? Simply because this administration wants to tamper with the mandate that the people have given. It's in parts it's frustrating, it's infuriating, it's disappointing, and I guess there are times in one's day, in one's week, when all these sort of conflicting emotions bubble over, and then I end up saying some of the things I say. Then, of course, I'm promptly told that while it's good to be an honest politician, sometimes too much honesty is not such a good thing, and I should keep some of these opinions to myself, and so that's where that goes. Now, what would be a best case scenario? What would be a good scenario? How much of what has been done to Jammu and Kashmir can be undone? I will quote no lesser an institution than the Supreme Court of India. which says that we can turn the clock back as far as we want. When they admitted the petitions challenging 5th August 2019, and they were asked to expedite these and to take up these hearings on a fast track basis, they said, look, we will begin the hearings, we will do them, and it doesn't matter how long it takes us to pass the judgment, because as far as we are concerned, everything that has been done, we can undo, we can turn back the clock. So I have to trust the Supreme Court when they say that they can undo it. My own sort of limited sense of intelligence will tell me that you will reach a point where it will be impossible to undo some of the changes that have been done, and that time will end up being of the essence. That you cannot have an indefinite period of domicile being changed, of land laws having been affected, of cadre of J&K administrative services and police services officers being changed, of forest service officers being changed, and similar changes being put into place, and then turn around and say that all this can be undone. Because somebody will turn around and say, well, so much water has flown in the Jhelum that we'll now have to accept this as the new reality, which is not what we're willing to accept. So for me, a good outcome at the moment would be for the Supreme Court to begin hearings immediately on the petitions challenging the 5th of August 2019. It's not like the Supreme Court is not working at all. We've seen the Supreme Court take cognizance of what's happening with the farmer protests and step into those. If the farmers' protests can invite the attention of the Supreme Court and their observation can include words that this did not seem to include any consultations, then there were no consultations with Jammu and Kashmir before what happened on the 5th of August 2019. By that same yardstick of consultation, then the Supreme Court needs to step in with what happened in J&K and start hearing us out, and let the weight of our arguments make up their minds. We're all set to put forth our arguments in front of the Supreme Court, but we need that to start. I mean, individuals, highly placed individuals in the media are able to get a hearing from the Supreme Court within hours, if not days, of them approaching that highest institution in our legal setup. So I think it's a good outcome for us would be those hearings to begin, and we putting our case in front. The best outcome would be that the Supreme Court says that what happened to Jammu and Kashmir was unconstitutional, illegal, and rolls it back.
You just spoke about how there was no lack of consultation. Sorry, I joined a little late, so I don't know if somebody has already asked this question. But you had a meeting with the Prime Minister, Mr. Farooq Abdullah, had a meeting with the Prime Minister just ahead of this, of the decisions that were announced. And you haven't really spoken about that, but I'm just wondering if you'd like to tell us what passed between you all during that meeting. I mean, what did he say?
There was no consultation. There was no consultation during that meeting. We weren't told that 2 days hence Parliament was going to move to remove Article 35A and completely dismember Article 370. If that had been told to us, obviously we would have considered that as consultation and put our point of view to the Prime Minister at that time. There was a lot of disquiet at that time because nobody knew what to expect. Rumors were this place was flooded with rumors. Whether it was, there was rumors about there being a conflict with Pakistan. There were rumors about a crackdown against separatists and their supporters. There were, of course, rumors about 35A and it being removed or watered down. There was some speculation about Article 370. Some people expected J&K to be carved up into separate administrative units. So what we went to the Prime Minister to request was that nothing untoward be done to Jammu and Kashmir. Nothing done to Jammu and Kashmir that would impact the sort of very tenuous calm that we saw prevailing on the ground there. And the Prime Minister said, he said that he has no intent, he doesn't want to see an unsettled Jammu and Kashmir. that he wants a calm Jammu and Kashmir. He wants a Jammu and Kashmir in which democracy prevails and in which the voice of the people is given the importance that it deserves. And I've said this in the past as well. My interpretation of what the Prime Minister said was flawed. I took that to mean that nothing untoward was going to happen in Jammu and Kashmir in the next few days, and I was wrong, and I guess that's on me.
Do you see that as a betrayal?
Well, if the Prime Minister had categorically told me that they're not going to remove Article 370 and 35A, it would have been a betrayal. But that's not what he said in those many words. So, no, I wouldn't be able to use that as, I wouldn't say that. I'm disappointed that the government took the steps that it did. I'm disappointed that it did it without a mandate from the people. I'm disappointed that it felt the need to remove J&K Assembly from the scene and usurp the powers of the Assembly in the hands of the then governor, who then gave himself the powers of the Constituent Assembly and then rewrote Jammu and Kashmir's relationship with India. So yes, that is a betrayal. That's a betrayal of what the Union of India promised to the people of Jammu and Kashmir.
So I wanted to ask Omar if the PAGD would be more than an electoral alliance, because for now all the criticism to the second round of detentions have been unilateral. PDP protested land laws; they did that alone. Why isn't there a more unified voice from within the PAGD?
Look, I mean, I'm not an office bearer of the PAGD. I participate in the PAGD as vice president of the National Conference. The agenda of the PAGD, the timetable or the schedule or the activities of the PAGD are determined by the chairperson, the vice chairperson, and other office bearers of the PAGD. And there have been joint, it's not as if every action of the PAGD has been unilateral. The meeting of the PAGD with the political representatives in Kargil, the meetings of the PAGD with representatives in Jammu, other sort of joint press conferences and stuff like that of the PAGD are on the record as well. But we are individual political parties in our own right also. And nothing, I mean, at no point in time has the PAGD taken the view that we must subsume all our activities under the single banner of the People's Alliance. We, as the National Conference, reserve the right, and I made that very clear, that the National Conference reserves the right to unilaterally do political activities of its own, where it feels necessary, press conferences of its own, and in the same vein, the PDP, Mehbooba Mufti Saiba, Sajad Lone Sahab and others, they reserve the right to do some of their own political activities as well. So, but we are not simply an electoral alliance. In fact, we became an electoral alliance much after we became the People's Alliance for the Gupkar Declaration. We were formed, this alliance came into being under very trying and difficult circumstances to question and to challenge what happened on the 5th of August 2019. The elections were neither asked for by us nor something that we sought. They were foisted on us, and we feel that the participation in them was really the only reasonable avenue that was open to us.
Since the abrogation, the series of steps taken by the center or the administration, the governor's administration in Jammu and Kashmir, the internet blackout, the detentions, a defense from members of the central government as well as the BJP on our pages and elsewhere has been all of these have happened before, whether it's detentions, whether it's communication blackout. How do you see the current relationship with the center or with the Kashmir government as being, how is it fundamentally different from what had gone on before, perhaps in a piecemeal manner?
In every way, it's fundamentally different. When was the last time you detained people and cited their ability to fight elections and the fact that they have mobilized voters to come out against the boycott call and against the threat of militants to participate in elections and to give them a stamp of legitimacy? When was the last time that was a grounds for detaining anybody? But that was the grounds that was used for detaining me under the Public Safety Act. I don't remember ever detaining a Hurriyat leader and saying that this Hurriyat leader was detained because they have participated in elections or they have mobilized voters. So, I mean, how can anybody in the BJP say that this is normal? I don't, in my lifetime, ever remember a mainstream political leader being detained under preventive arrest, much less under the Public Safety Act. Now, if we go on to the communication blackout, yes, different governments, mine included, have from time to time felt the need to restrict communications, whether it be mobile phone usage or mobile phone speeds, but for very limited periods of time. And always with the view that these must be restored at the earliest possible opportunity. This, what we are seeing now, the absence of 4G mobile connectivity except in 2 districts for the last 1.5 years plus. I mean, this has been normalized. When have we ever seen a situation like this? Even in the worst times, I remember landline phones always worked. In fact, most of the time, mobile phones also worked. What we occasionally were forced to switch off was mobile internet. That also used very selectively and for very short periods of time. This, what you see today, I mean, what about stopping, let's say, my father from offering Eid prayers in Hazratbal? Is that normal? Putting a truck outside Mehbooba Mufti's gate to stop her from traveling to Badgam to meet political workers. Is that normal? I haven't seen this done before. Where has this ever been done in Jammu and Kashmir or anywhere else? Picking up leaders of the National Conference under preventive detention for no rhyme or reason, simply because you want to interfere with the electoral verdict in that particular district. None of this is normal. And that's the worrying part, that the BJP actually sees this as normal, that ye sab hota hai. I mean, it should worry them that they have created an environment of, I mean, it's which rights and sort of fundamental rights do we have today? None. You don't enjoy the right to free speech. You don't enjoy the right to free movement. And for the BJP, this is normal. So I guess this is the new Jammu Kashmir that was carved out. And they're telling us that this is normal and learn to live with it, which I'm sorry, I'm not willing to do.
I have a question, which is in continuation of your earlier statement that the case is pending before Supreme Court and where you have a realization that time is of essence. But isn't there also a reluctance on your part, because there have been a series of orders which are more like legislations but come in the form of executive orders like land laws or domicile status? But haven't you been like reluctant to fight it out? You're waiting for Supreme Court to do something, but instead of not taking these small fights also to Supreme Court, then hasn't been any application.
We've taken the fundamental fight to the Supreme Court. Everything that this government is attempting to do is under the umbrella of what was done on the 5th of August 2019. We want to go to the source of the river rather than try and build a dam 100 or 200 kilometers downstream. The source of this river is 5th August 2019. This flood that we're seeing today, this flood of executive orders, this flood of changes, these are not in isolation. These are not individual incidents. They all stem from 5th August 2019. And that's why, as far as we are concerned, instead of tying ourselves up in little battles, we want to fight the main one, which is to call into question the legality of everything that is happening because of what happened on the 5th of August 2019. And that's what we're doing.
Is there a move that an application could be moved for Supreme Court for urgent hearing, because this series of orders do keep coming every day, every week?
Well, we're trying. The petitioners, and there are various petitioners, including the People's Conference, the CPIM, 2 leaders of the National Conference. They have approached the Supreme Court at various points in time to try and move this forward. Unfortunately, we are also the victims of this very strange and sort of very different way in which courts are functioning these days because of the restrictions of COVID.
After the results of the DDC elections, one of the things that we heard from the PAGD was that it was a mandate for what the PAGD stands for, which is for the restoration of statehood, for the rollback of all the decisions that were taken on the 5th of August. On the other hand, we have the BJP saying that this is an acceptance by all the people who voted, I mean, for and the people who participated in the elections for, I mean, they've accepted what we did, and and that's a very positive sign. So which of these is true, especially because these DDCs will start functioning from within the system as it exists now? The elected members will function as district development councils. They will draw up development plans. They will get funds. They will, things will start moving. So in a sense, isn't it true that they've actually accepted the new system or the decisions as they have been implemented?
Who has accepted? The voters. Well, if the voters had accepted, if the voters had accepted and were happy with what had happened, they were given an opportunity to stamp their approval by voting for the BJP and its ally, the Apni Party. The BJP and the Apni Party have made no secret of the fact that a vote for them is an endorsement of what happened on the 5th of August 2019, and to basically accept the current reality as the new reality and to go forward from there. And we've seen the results. The Apni Party is trying to make chairpersons in districts now using the police because they couldn't win enough support from voters. So clearly there is a gap between what they claim and the reality. Look, the People's Alliance never set out to use this election as a referendum. We wanted to test where we stand with the people, whether there is space for mainstream political activity, whether there is space for the constituents of the People's Alliance for the Gupkar Declaration. It's the BJP and the Apni Party that converted this into a referendum. They are the ones who went out and said, vote for us. We need a stamp of approval on what happened on the 5th of August 2019. We need a stamp of approval that people don't want a reversal of the changes that were made. And they didn't get that stamp of approval, except for the BJP in a handful of districts in Jammu. They did not get that stamp of approval. So they can't claim that this is the new normal. Yes, it's a fact that the DDCs will have to work within the current system. We know that. We know that, but that doesn't mean we accept the current system. We are working within the current system so long as we are forced to, while at the same time working to change the current system back to what it was.
Before this election, many BJP leaders, am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Many BJP leaders have indicated that, we may not have a assembly election soon, because it is more or less they will try and turn this representatives into, a kind of MLA's designation, or they will assign the duties of MLAs. That, more than one or two BJP leaders had indicated that. So now that the results have, gone, I think it is much, it is not as they expected. Do you think that this will, BJP will, or the government will delay the assembly election further? Or they will not think about an assembly election at least for 4 years? Do you have any apprehension like that?
Well, let me say this, it's not an apprehension because, I'm not particularly enthused about assembly elections as such, particularly under the current circumstances. An assembly in a union territory, we know what it's all about. You only have to look at the examples of Delhi and Pondicherry to see how their elected chief ministers are humiliated and reduced to non-entities by highly active lieutenant governors. So the prospect of an assembly in a union territory doesn't fill me with any joy or any enthusiasm. That said, I don't foresee an assembly election anytime soon. Now, had you had my dad sitting here, the answer would have been completely different. My father is convinced that you will see an assembly election sometime in 2021. I am at complete odds with him on that conclusion. I don't believe that you will see an assembly election before the next parliament election. I don't believe that you will see an assembly election before the next parliament election for various reasons. You have a delimitation commission for which Jammu and Kashmir has pretty much been singled out. Even though 5th August 2019 was to bring Jammu and Kashmir at par with the rest of the country on the matters of delimitation because it suits BJP politically. They've singled out Jammu and Kashmir and are now in the process of delimiting constituencies. That work hasn't really begun in terms of public consultation and stuff like that because of COVID. So we can expect that that process will take a considerable amount of time. And once that is done, new constituencies are identified, all the work is put into place, you'll be pretty much at the fag end of this parliament term. And I wouldn't be surprised if Government of India turns around and says, well, hang on, we have a parliament election in a few months. We might as well do both together. So I'd be very surprised if we have an assembly election anytime in the future. I think the BJP and the central government wanted to remove the possibility of being accused of ruling Jammu and Kashmir remotely. Having DDCs in place, they will be able to take the defense that Jammu and Kashmir actually has a democratic framework within which governance and development activity is taking place. And for the time being, we don't need an assembly. So I'm not sort of in any way sort of preparing myself mentally for the prospect of an assembly election. But as I said, my party president disagrees vehemently with me on this. And it's something that we agree to disagree on.
So this is about the new domicile law. You voiced your apprehensions about it. And I remember long back, Naeem Akhtar had said he feared Israel-like settlements in the valley. So I think a couple of days back, a Punjabi businessman was gunned down by a newly formed militant outfit. And they said this is just a start and there'll be more targeted killings of new settlers or something like that. How do you think the new law will pan out?
Well, there's no doubt that the new law has sort of created a sense of unease amongst people. And that unease is multiplied when we see the way in which one union territory is treated in comparison to another. I mean, let's not forget that 2 union territories were formed on the 5th of August 2019. Yet only one is singled out for experiments with domicile and with land laws and with all the other stuff. The other is it's sort of a hands-off, touch-me-not approach. I mean, if you look at the way Ladakh is being handled, as opposed to the way Jammu and Kashmir is being treated, there's no wonder that people here are apprehensive. Now, I don't for a moment justify, and nor do I in any way condone what was done at the hands of that militant organization with the jeweler. There can be no justification whatsoever, no matter how much we are apprehensive, no matter how apprehensive we are about these new land laws and the domicile laws, the use of violence to express our resentment or to put a stop to what is happening is not acceptable. Which is why I would like to see the courts play a more proactive role in taking up these concerns and actually starting the process of listening to people. At least then we will have some sense of quiet satisfaction that yes, we are being heard, and there is the prospect that the wrongs that have been done to us will be addressed, will be corrected.
Omar, if I may ask about this, what happened with this laws, when we were having a conversation with the LG, of course, there are apprehensions that, on the land laws that, people will settle here. But he was saying that in the last so many days, not a single land deal has happened in the valley. So he was saying that, these are largely imaginary fears. And he said that, you tell me if one such deal has happened, then you can accuse me of anything.
Well, I tend to agree with him on that point. And I have also been making this point time and again that people in Kashmir need to worry far less than people in Jammu need to. Land deals and stuff like that will happen in Jammu long before they happen here. So in that respect, I think what the Lieutenant Governor is saying is not wrong, but it's the prospect. It's the way in which it's being sold, the way in which the BJP is sort of talking about this in the rest of the country. Our fears are not unfounded. Yes, there are no land deals that are happening right now, but the way in which the BJP is trying to sell this as the prospect of changing Jammu and Kashmir and particularly Kashmir in terms of resettling people here. That's what makes people fearful in the valley.
One more thing, Omar, this post declaring this, Roshni Act null and void, the government then, the administration then, again went back to the court stating that, it wanted to kind of take note that there are lots of people with very small landholdings who had built probably their only house in such land, and it wanted to kind of have a set of criteria to spare them. You cannot equate a very small landholder with people who have kind of utilized the Roshni Act or taken advantage, or not taken advantage. Basically, they looked at the Roshni Act and kind of with bigger parcels. So how do you see that this distinction is valid? Do you think that, the illegality is any less between a small landholder and a large landholder?
Look, I'm not a lawyer, but to my mind, such an order would be bad under law because the law doesn't make such a distinction. You don't make a distinction. Theft is theft. Illegal use of Roshni would be illegal whether it is 5 square meters of land or 500 square meters of land. And therefore the government, or particularly in this case, the BJP, trying to save itself. Because, the BJP, I think, misunderstood how Roshni had been implemented and who the real beneficiaries of Roshni were. The BJP was under the impression that Roshni had been used to accommodate Muslims, particularly in Jammu province. That somehow Roshni had been used to create these large land banks for Muslims to settle in Jammu province. Yet when the facts came to light, it became increasingly obvious to them that the biggest beneficiaries of Roshni had been the poor Hindu farmers of Jammu, who were able to convert their small land holdings from state land into freehold land. And that's why this mad scramble, because initially when this Roshni was declared a scam, you had the BJP saying, "Dekho ji, humne land jihad rok diya. Ye log zameen ka jihad kar rahe the, aur humne isko rok diya." But there was no land jihad because the beneficiaries of Roshni were not the majority Muslim community of Jammu and Kashmir, but the largest beneficiaries of Roshni were the small, poor Hindu farmers of Jammu. And that's why this sudden scramble to the courts to have their order overturned and amended. But as far as I know, and having talked to lawyers, any sort of distinction that is sought to be brought just on the basis of the quantum of land involved would be bad under law. If there has been an illegal use, or if somebody has taken undue advantage of Roshni, whether they are small or big, they must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And that's it. No religious angle, no monetary angle, no regional angle. And that's what we expect from our courts.
Well, when you talk of statehood, what does it mean? State which existed prior to August 5, 2019 are excluding Ladakh?
Well, if you were to go by I mean, if democracy is what rules and public opinion is what counts, then even in Ladakh, the majority of people do not want to be separated from Jammu and Kashmir. So in an ideal world, the will of the people would prevail, and state would mean the original state of Jammu and Kashmir pre-5th August 2019.
These DDC elections, states saw new realignment of political forces in Kashmir, especially in Kashmir. All the mainstream parties, National Conference, PDP, People's Conference, etc., joining hands, who used to contest against each other in the past. After unitedly contesting the elections, what difference they made in DDC elections? Basically, if we see the scenario in 2014, Jammu goes BJP way and Kashmir to PAGD.
Well, actually, I mean, it's true for the 4 or 5 districts that you count as Jammu. But Jammu is more than just 4 or 5 districts. Jammu is 10 districts. And us fighting together actually changed the political scenario in a number of districts which otherwise had gone BJP way. Today, the People's Alliance is in a position to claim chairmanship in Ramban district and chairmanship in Kishtwar district, where we have defeated senior leaders of the BJP to establish positions of dominance. So I think the coming together of these mainstream political parties that traditionally have fought elections against each other changed the dynamics in constituencies outside of these 4 or 5 districts that are traditionally considered Jammu. That's why we've always said that when you talk about Jammu, you need to look beyond Jammu and its immediate surrounding areas. Jammu is not just Samba, Kathua, Jammu, and parts of Riyasi and Udhampur. Jammu is also the mountains of Jammu, which oftentimes their views get ignored when Jammu is talked about.
Will you go in assembly elections all together?
Bhai sahab, election ho tab baat karenge na. I just said in an earlier answer to a question that I don't foresee assembly elections for the foreseeable future. So why should I get into a hypothetical situation when there is no grounds for us to be even discussing that? As in when you get an indication from the Election Commission of India that they're actively looking at assembly elections in Jammu and Kashmir, then we'll sit down and talk about this.
You just said that the results of the PAGD, I mean, you participated in the PAGD, in the DDC elections to gauge what kind of enthusiasm there was for, or what kind of space you people had to do politics in Jammu and Kashmir. What kind of enthusiasm there was for among the people for politics, and that you got a sense of all this. Now, how are you actually going to operationalize this? I mean, what is the
well, that's actually
what is your politics?
That's actually something that's on the agenda for the next People's Alliance meeting, which will take place somewhere in the last 10 days of January, to take on board, now that we've had enough time to digest the results of the DDC elections, exactly this point, that how do we now go forward to operationalize this? One part is, of course, the legal battle that we're fighting in the courts. The other point is that as political parties, we need to have political issues to keep talking about. We need to keep a political front active. So how does the People's Alliance propose to operationalize this DDC result going ahead, considering, as I said earlier, that the prospect of an assembly election looks very far removed, is something that we're going to discuss after the 20th.
You said about the DDC election that the election was imposed on you and there was no other choice left but to actually participate in it. What if your father is right and the elections, the assembly elections are actually held this year or even next year, and you are left with no choice but to participate in it?
You mean me personally or the party?
No, the parties.
But I've not seen any indication from any political party that's part of the People's Alliance that we won't participate in assembly elections.
Right, but there is a view that you want your demands restored first, and then, you know, people are saying, like you just said, people are saying, why should we participate in a UT assembly election?
Well,
it should be a state assembly election.
That's me. I'm not speaking, and when I say that, I'm not speaking either for the National Conference or for the People's Alliance. When I talked about an assembly election under the guise of a union territory, this is me as an individual. I'm not in any way wearing the hat of the Vice President of the National Conference.
Of course, Omar, the National Conference did make gains in the Jammu division as well in the DDC polls, but the nature of the larger nature of say outcome has been BJP in Jammu and PAGD in Kashmir. Do you see this changing ever?
Look, it's a reality that we've always lived with. What is now BJP Jammu was earlier Congress Jammu. And I'm talking about pre-1989-90, when the National Conference, before the 87 Rajiv Farooq Accord, you saw similar divisions. The National Conference derived most of its support from Kashmir and the mountain districts of Jammu. The Congress derived the lion's share of its support from the plains of Jammu and a handful of seats from Kashmir and elsewhere. So I mean, it's actually a little surprising that commentators who claim to know Jammu and Kashmir so well are so willing to ignore what has traditionally been a reality of Jammu and Kashmir, which is that no political party has been able to straddle both sides of the Pir Panchal effectively. These divisions between Jammu and Kashmir have existed all along. They're a reality that we live with. So, I mean, why is it seen as something unique or something different now?
So, just a follow up to this, one of the things which, when we go to Jammu or to Kashmir is, the relative development in these two regions. Do you see that, over a longer horizon, do you see that development has been skewed, which kind of further kind of reinforces this sentiment of Jammu being different from Kashmir and the resentment on both sides regarding development?
But if you mean Jammu is better developed than Kashmir, then yes. I mean, if you see the levels of industrialization in Jammu, they far outstrip anything that you have in Kashmir. If you see the development of Jammu city as a capital, as opposed to Kashmir, as opposed to Srinagar, there are differences here, even in connectivity. How many decades now have we been sitting, having been promised a rail link between Kashmir and the rest of the country, and it being non-existent? National highways. When was the last time you heard Jammu was cut off from the rest of the country? Today we're in a position where the national highway between Kashmir and the rest of the country is going to be closed for up to 10 days because the road has simply disappeared. So there are imbalances in development that are a reality, and those need to be addressed.
I also want to ask you, taking on from Raj's question about, while there is a sense of despair, National Conference has won 67 seats, you're in second position in 44, and you've marked your presence across 18 of the 20 districts. Is that not something that you take heart from?
No, I take a lot of heart from it. I believe that, as I said in the answer to an earlier question, that nobody today can turn around and say that the National Conference is a non-existent party, or that the National Conference is dead, or that you can do any sort of political activity in Jammu and Kashmir ignoring the National Conference. We are without doubt the preeminent political force in Jammu and Kashmir today, in spite of everything that you've thrown at us, in spite of everything that the government of India has tried to do to undermine or to demolish the National Conference. We have withstood all that and more, and we are where we are. So yeah, I take a lot of heart from that as the vice president of the organization.
Vandita Mishra is our National Opinions Edit page editor. Vandita?
Mr. Abdullah, I wanted to ask you about the state of the opposition. So when August 5 happened, there wasn't, and there hasn't been even since then, a loud enough or a persistent enough or a consistent enough voice from the opposition on Kashmir. And even if you look outside of Kashmir, where do you see the opposition going? I mean, there was a different kind of opposition space earlier. You've worked with Vajpayee ji. Where do you see the challenge to the BJP coming from? And will this polarization and this complete, emasculation of the Congress, of the opposition right now, do you see this set to continue, or do you see something happening?
This is particularly on the role of the opposition post 5th August 2019. This is another one of those issues on which my father and I have agreed to disagree. I believe vehemently that we were let down by a large section of opposition parties, leaders who we were happy to call friends, parties that we worked with, parties that we actively went out to support in their own elections, and when they had trouble were largely silent and had pretty much disappeared from view when we were on the receiving end of everything that happened post 5th August 2019. It's a matter of, it's a festering sore point as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think I will ever forgive and forget. It's something that will always be at the back of my mind. Whenever I come across these people, I'll be perfectly polite, I will be perfectly respectful, but I will be also perfectly disconnected from their problems and their realities as they were from ours. That's not to say that we didn't receive support from some, Mamata Banerjee and her party, for one example, Stalin and the DMK would be another. The left, they have traditionally been friends of Jammu and Kashmir. They were forceful in opposition, in opposing what was happening here. There were stray voices within the Congress party. It would be wrong on my part to forget leaders like Mr. Chidambaram, even leaders like Mr. Kapil Sibal and others who spoke, wrote, and talked about what was happening here, including others as well. But as an organization, I think the Congress party failed us and failed the people of Jammu and Kashmir, as did a lot of other opposition parties that I'm not going to single out by naming. Some of them actively colluded with what the BJP did. And that, to my mind, is not just surprising, but it's unforgivable. Look, I understand on the question of Article 370, the BJP had raised the pitch to such a level that it was difficult to oppose it. So I'm looking at both things. As to the two things that happened to Jammu and Kashmir. One was the Article 370 issue. The second one was the dismemberment and the reduction of the state to a union territory. Now, to actively support the BJP in something like this, let's say by a party like the Aam Aadmi Party, is to my mind something I will never forget. I mean, here is a party that is actively fighting for full statehood for Delhi. I mean, here is a chief minister who is regularly humiliated by the union government, by the lieutenant governor, and happily goes along and supports what the BJP did to us in Jammu and Kashmir. I'm sorry, but that's something I just simply will not forgive and forget. Take the Telangana Rashtra Samiti, a party that was founded on the respect that they believed Telangana deserved, that fought a long campaign for statehood for their region, happily sat back and supported when a state was carved up into 2 union territories and downgraded the way we were. again, something that I find very difficult to reconcile myself to. So I don't have as much sort of unhappiness or disappointment on the 370 question, because as I said, it would have been difficult for them to oppose it the way the BJP had sold it in the rest of the country. But they really didn't need to go along and actively support the statehood and the dismemberment the way they did. Now, how do I see the opposition in the rest of the country today? I don't really see one. I think if I was Prime Minister Modi today, I'd be one of the happiest people around. I said this in his first term, that unless we do something drastic, 2019 is a done deal. I am afraid that today in 2021 January, I'm forced to say that unless we drastically overhaul the way we are doing opposition in this country today, even 2024 is looking like a done deal. And that's not a prospect that is comforting to a lot of us. I mean, this government must have an opposition, and it must have an effective opposition. It must have a strong opposition. And if that opposition cannot come from the only remaining seemingly national party after the BJP, then somebody else is going to have to step up to the plate. Then we're going to have to, as I said, we're going to have to relook how we do opposition. Then we're going to have to do it at the state level individually, because we can't give this government a free hand. But I mean, and also you can't oppose the BJP by trying to be the BJP's B team. BJP is a right-wing nationalist party. It's founded on a hardcore agenda of Hindutva. There are two platforms on which trying to take the fight to the BJP, you are going to lose. If you try and fight them on the Hindutva plank, or if you try and fight them on this hyper-nationalist security platform, you are going to lose. And therefore, just accept that and move on. There are a whole lot of other issues on which this government can be opposed. The way in which it's handling the economy, the way in which it's handling a whole host of other issues, the way in which it's handling the farmers and agriculture, the social structure of this country. There are so many issues on which the BJP can be opposed. But if we're going to try and oppose the BJP by being the BJP's B team, by claiming ownership over the Ram Mandir issue, the Ram Mandir issue doesn't belong to any other party but the RSS and the BJP. And if anybody else tries to claim ownership of that, then you're living in fool's paradise. As a voter, why will I vote for the B team of the BJP when I have the A team available to me? Therefore, we have to craft a narrative that is completely independent of what the BJP is doing and play to our strengths, not play to the BJP's strengths.
If I can just ask you another question there. You said that that you should the way forward for the opposition party is not to be the BJP's B team on Hindutva. But there could have been another position staked out by the opposition on Hindutva, which is to confront Hindutva. Are you saying that the opposition should neither play B team on Hindutva nor confront Hindutva, but it should actually look for other issues outside of Hindutva? Are you then, I mean, from what, if this is what you're saying, are you also not in a certain sense
by all means confront the BJP on this hyper issue, but don't make it the sort of the front and center point on which you're fighting. You can't, I mean, if the BJP won a victory with the verdict in the Supreme Court with regard to the Babri Masjid. It was theirs. I mean, you can't claim it as your own. Ki nahi ji, hum bhi iske saath the. Hum bhi masjid ke mandir ke saath hain. That's not opposition then. That's pandering. You need to stand up. Sometimes going against the flow is going to be difficult, but you need to stand up and do it.
Yeah, but if you're not pandering, could you not be opposing it? Could you not be confronting?
By all means, oppose it, but you're not going to be able to make it the central. But my point is, you're not going to be able to make it the central plank of your anti-BJP election campaign. It's going to be one plank, but it can't be the central plank. There are other issues on which the BJP is weaker, on which the BJP is on the receiving end. Those should be front and center. Look, like it or not, at the moment, for various reasons, it appears as if your prime minister is coated in Teflon. Personal allegations against the prime minister do not stick. Let's accept it. As an opposition leader, I am willing to accept that mounting a personal campaign against the prime minister is not going to work. So fine, then we don't do it. We find other chinks in his armor and we exploit those. We find chinks in the armor of the BJP. We exploit those. When we take the fight to his strengths, we play to his advantage. We're playing on his home ground. We need to somehow, I mean, there are people who with far more experience than me, far more intelligent than I am, who know politics a lot better. I am a small-time politician from a small-time union territory tucked away in the corner of the country. I am hardly somebody who can lecture the big stalwarts of this country. But I'm sure there are people with greater intelligence than mine that can sit down and work out a coherent strategy to take the fight to this government. Because otherwise they're just going to ram everything past us and we're going to be left with nothing.
So then, how do you see the politics of Rahul Gandhi? Do you think he's got it wrong? Do you think he should not confront the PM on the issues that he does? He should be looking elsewhere?
Look, Rahul Gandhi is an honest, well-meaning politician. But Rahul will need to decide for himself where he fits into this entire political spectrum. If he is to be the leader of the Congress party, then step up and be the leader of the Congress party. If not, then let somebody else be the leader of the Congress party. And until such time as the Congress is able to put its own house in order, perhaps it's time for the NDA to look at fresh sort of avenues or other options. Let the Congress get its house in order. Let the Congress sort out its own internal leadership issues. And then if the Congress wants to assume leadership of the National Democratic Alliance again, sorry, the UPA, not the NDA. Sorry, if the Congress wants to assume leadership of the UPA again, that's for the UPA to decide. Now, as far as the issues on which Rahul Gandhi takes the fight to the BJP or to the Prime Minister, a lot of them are valid. The agriculture one, the employment one, the economy, there are issues like that. But there are some issues on which, let's face it, we ended up playing to the Prime Minister's strength. Making the Rafale deal the center point of our election campaign in 2019 didn't work out. Now, I have the advantage of hindsight to be able to say this. Rahul didn't have the advantage of hindsight when he decided that this was going to be the strategy that was adopted. So it's a little unfair for me now to sit in a position of judgment. But it didn't work. So fine, we move on. We accept that, look, some things work, some things don't, and let's move on. And I think as a politician that has fought elections against the BJP in Jammu and Kashmir, at the parliament level, at the assembly level, at the grassroots panchayat level, taking or making personal attacks against the Prime Minister plays to the Prime Minister's strengths. He's able to assume the aura of a martyr. And playing to your opposition's strengths is not sensible politics.
Sir, Abdullah, I just wanted to know from you, do you think that there is an organized attempt that is being made for the cultural appropriation of Kashmir? There are talks of having, vegetarian variant of Vazwan. A prominent film actress yesterday announced a film on Kashmir. Are you fearful of all these activities that are happening?
No, hi Zishan. No, I'm not fearful of a cultural appropriation because our culture is a lot stronger. Our culture has withstood far more strenuous attacks than this. So I mean, there will be attempts to appropriate our culture, but I don't believe they will meet with any success. Movies on Kashmir are a dime a dozen. Show me who hasn't attempted a movie on Kashmir, fictional or otherwise. Some met with some degrees of success in the box office. Some disappeared without a trace. So if there, and I haven't seen which Bollywood actress you're referring to, so I have no idea who's attempting a movie on Kashmir, but good luck. I just hope that you actually come to Kashmir and film this movie and don't do it somewhere else and claim for it to have been shot in Kashmir, but at least if the movie is about Kashmir, then the people of Kashmir should gain some monetary benefit from it. As to vegetarian Vazwan, we have a large number of vegetarian dishes in our Vazwan. I know of many vegetarians who love coming and having Vazwan here. They may not have a rista or a gushtaba, but they enjoy our tomato paneer, our haq, our nadru, our guchi, damalu, which is in some ways appropriated from Kashmiri Pandits. But I mean, I can list out numerous vegetarian items for you that we serve in the normal course of a Vazwan. So the fact that we can have a vegetarian Vazwan is not cultural appropriation. I think it's something that already exists.
Pakistan, I mean, in the last 2 years, there's been this befuddlement in Pakistan about what has happened in Kashmir, and Pakistan has not been able to respond politically, if I may use that word, to the government's actions in Kashmir, and even in domestic discourse within India, we don't hear anything. I mean, except for this whole terrorism bit, we don't hear anybody saying, you know, we must talk with Pakistan about Kashmir. I mean, it seems to be, as if that Kashmir issue has been wiped off the agenda between India and Pakistan. Would you agree with that? Is there anything left to talk to Pakistan about Kashmir now?
You mean other than the part of Jammu and Kashmir that lies with Pakistan? Have we given up on that?
No, I mean, earlier there was, it was on the agenda.
No, we can't cherry pick which issues we want to talk about and which we don't. If we have decided there is nothing on Jammu and Kashmir to talk about with Pakistan, then that's fine. Then you washed your hands off the part of Jammu and Kashmir that lies with Pakistan, and we'll close that chapter as well. But if that's not a chapter you've closed, then I don't think anybody can turn around and say that there is no scope for discussion with Pakistan. There is, I mean, at the end of the day, Jammu and Kashmir, whichever side of the political lines you sit on, there is an active issue in Jammu and Kashmir that requires resolution. How you decide to resolve it.
Does Pakistan have place in it? Does Pakistan have a voice in that resolution?
How can it not? It's sitting on your, how can it not? It's sitting on your territory. I'm purely from let's say the BJP's point of view. There is, I mean, I haven't seen any realistic assessment of a military solution to the part of Jammu and Kashmir that's with Pakistan, which means the only solution is a diplomatic one. Diplomacy involves dialogue. And therefore, unless you have washed your hands of that part of Jammu and Kashmir, at some point or the other, you're going to have to talk. So India will talk about that part of Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistan will talk about this part of Jammu and Kashmir. But a dialogue will take place. You will talk about Jammu and Kashmir. You'll just approach it from two completely different directions. So I'm not one of those who believes that there is no scope for discussion. There will always be scope for discussion. So long as there is a disagreement about Jammu and Kashmir between India and Pakistan, you will have to discuss it to resolve it.
Again, going back to the assembly elections, there's a talk about a delimitation happening before that. Do you have any fears that it may be tinkered in such a way that the BJP may get majority of seats from Jammu and take away the major power share in that way?
Not if it's done correctly and free of political interference. Because at the end of the day, in a delimitation exercise, it's the numbers that matter. They will have to base their delimitation on the census data of the 2010 census. And if that is what they do, then, I mean, they can't modify the seats in the numbers that they want to. In fact, quoting no less a person than the erstwhile governor of Jammu and Kashmir and the last governor of Jammu and Kashmir, Mr. Satyapal Malik, when we went to meet him in the run-up to 5th August and were talking to him about the concerns that we had, one of my colleagues said that this delimitation is creating concerns amongst the people. And his answer, because he always referred to the BJP as hum, even as governor, he could never distance himself from the BJP. So his answer to my colleague was, "Isme hamara kya hai? Isme to hame kuch milega nahi. Delimitation mein bhi aapki seatein badh jayengi." So obviously he knew that if the delimitation was done on the basis of the 2010 census, then the objective of the BJP would not be met. But I don't want to prejudge what the BJP or what the Delimitation Commission is going to come back with. As I said, if it allows the numbers to speak as it should, then I don't think the BJP will be able to make any major changes to the way in which the seat sharing has happened.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Omar, for taking time out of your schedule. And we had a very good conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.